So I've been saying for weeks now that in the context of Shamatha we have this pyramid, and there is something sequential about it, or hierarchical about it, in the sense of the foundation being the sense of ease, relaxation. You know it so well, right? You predict everything I'm about to say. But that foundation of ease, of looseness, of relaxation, just the opposite of being uptight. And then on that basis, the composure, the stillness, the continuity, the quiet, the sync-pointedness. And then on top of the pyramid, the clarity, the vividness, the acuity. That's just within the context of Shamatha. Right? And then, of course, there's the synergy among all three. When the wheel of Shamatha really gets rolling, then they're all reinforcing each other. We turn to Vipashyana, and it's very clear, I think, obvious to all of us right now, that the practice of Vipashyana is all up there on the top of the pyramid. Right? It's all sharp. In fact, there's four, and in practicing Vipashyana, we are actually cultivating a psychological factor known as prajna. And in just Buddhist psychology, dealing with the 51 mental factors, prajna there simply means discerning intelligence. It doesn't have some lofty connotation like wisdom. It's just discerning intelligence, being sharp. But then when you cultivate it to its perfection, then we translate it as perfection of wisdom. So when intelligence is moved toward, bearing in mind, just a brief tangent here, there is such a thing, it's enormously important actually, that intelligence is not a virtue. It's not a virtue. It all depends on who are the companions of intelligence. And that is, if the companion of intelligence is egotism, arrogance, hatred, then the intelligence is like a mercenary. And it goes fully into the service of mental afflictions. And that's called Shirap-Nyomo-chen, afflictive intelligence. And the better you are at it, the more intelligent you are, the more damage you do to yourself and to everybody else. So that's why intelligence is not simply a virtue, because it's a mercenary. It could be just to make cooler video games, which is nothing wrong with it, I suppose, although something pretty nasty, I guess. But then that would just be ethically neutral intelligence, just perpetuating the same mold, just from video games. And then, of course, there's virtuous intelligence. So Vipashyana is really all about cultivating intelligence and leading it to wisdom so that it comes to full flower, it, of course, in the context of virtue, to wisdom, perfection of wisdom. And it may be of interest, just very briefly, that in the cultivation of intelligence, there are four kinds. I learned this a long time ago. I was in Switzerland. In fact, Geshe-Rabin gave me a practice that was all about cultivating four types of intelligence. I remember it to this day. And the four types are sharp intelligence. And we say that in English, I think in other European languages. Such and such a person really sharp. Sharp intelligence. Fast. Some people are really quick. Really quick. Nimble. Fast. And then the next dimension is Dansel. Pretty much means clear. Clear intelligence. Lucid. Clear and lucid. Crystal clear. Sometimes when if somebody's giving a talk on a very difficult topic, and they sit down, tutto chiaro? Is it completely clear? And if your intelligence is clear, you say, yes. See? Right. Because you've just that, it's just that. I can't use any more words. It's just very clear. Third type of intelligence. And you see all those three, quick, sharp, clear, they're up on the top of the pyramid. And as we are engaging in these Vipashyana practices over the last several days, we're just dancing around on the top of the pyramid. And it's no wonder if you feel a little bit tense, a bit high-strung, a bit tight as a result of doing that practice. And this is why Shamatha comes first. And this is why he said now multiple times, from the state of equipoise, then you go into Vipashyana again and again, that this is really yogi's route. There are many, many texts in all schools of Tibetan Buddhism and among great pundits of India, where they'll teach Madhyamaka, and they never say that. It just doesn't come up. And from the state of meditative equipoise, they're going into all of the philosophical analysis and differences of one school and another school and so forth and so on. All that has a place. But here he is, this is a short text, I mean, some of the Tzong works are massive, like 400 pages just unpacking Madhyamaka, let alone the many other great scholars. But this, as we see, he said everything he wanted to say in his root text and commentary, and they're both very short. This is the yogi's route. This is the yogi's route. Where instead of spending 10 or 15, 20 years on the debating courtyard and memorizing texts and debating and studying and learning, you take just enough of the theoretical learning to put it right into practice, and it brings about the same result. So the fourth one, though, is profound intelligence, Zala. And that's the one that really brings about very deep transformation. To my mind, to my interpretation, the first three are kind of preparation for that. Because if you never get to the profound one, then it doesn't sink in. It's like drip feed of water. It doesn't get down to the deepest roots. It doesn't transform your way of viewing reality. And if it doesn't, then it didn't work. If your perspective on reality doesn't shift as a result of your hearing, thinking, and meditating on emptiness and dependent origination, if it doesn't shift the way you view yourself, your mind, your body, the environment, other people, it didn't work, right? Because it's in that shift of view, assuming umetawa, the middle view, the centrist view, the Madhyamaka view, that's what really brings about very deep change in liberation. So, we've had a lot of yang in the afternoons, a lot of yang, a lot of kind of pushy, as well as intellectually challenging, I think, topics. When we're bringing together quantum cosmology and so forth and so on. Maybe it's time to balance out a little bit. So please find a comfortable position. We'll do something a little bit different. All of this exercise and training and cultivation of prajna is finally to unveil that which is already there and never developed. And that is your own pristine awareness. Taking refuge in this ground awareness, the aspiration to realize who you are. Settle your body, speech, and mind in the natural state. But to the best of your ability, relax deeply from your core in your body, totally loose, relaxed. The breath flowing unimpededly, effortlessly, as if when no one's at home, as if you were deep asleep. So there's no agent who is breathing. There's just breathing. Again, as if you were deep asleep. There's no one who's doing it. Let your eyes be gently open, soft, relaxed. Forehead open, no contraction. Evenly rest your awareness in the space in front of you without focusing on any object. As you rest quietly, not doing anything, you must be aware of appearances arising, visual, auditory, and so on. Appearances to the mind as well, of course. When the conceptual mind is activated, you're also aware of objects, things that have attributes. And then, of course, you're aware of being aware of awareness itself. And that's about it. Appearances, objects, awareness. And then we pose a very simple question. Do you have a sense of the appearances being over there? And your awareness of them being in here? Independent. Really resting in the subjective side. And having objects, be they appearances or other objects, on the objective side. Does that correspond to your experience? Inside and outside. Awareness in here, appearances over there. when thoughts arise, thoughts, memories, desires, and so on, do you have a sense of them flowing forth from in here? Out into the realm of appearances. Inward your awareness in upon itself with a question. Identify. The very nature of the awareness in here, that which is aware of appearances, and that which brings forth thoughts and images, desires, emotions. What is the nature of this subjective awareness? Examine it closely. See if you can find it and identify it. That which is aware, that which produces thoughts and so on. Identify that, and not just what flows from that, or what appears to that, but identify that. And if you cannot find that mind in here that is aware, and that mind in here from which thoughts flow forth, rest in that not finding. Rest in the unfindability of your own mind, the emptiness of your own awareness. And just rest. Rest without striving, without desiring, without modifying anything. Without doing. Awareness still, unmoving, without direction, wide open. always fresh, aware of whatever arises, without impeding any appearances, including the activities of the mind, concepts, memories, unimpeded. Rest in the stillness of this open awareness. And just be present. Abiding by the familiar instructions of resting without distraction, without being carried off by any appearances. Without grasping, without identifying with the mind or any of the activities of the mind. Let's continue practicing now in silence. repeat the very familiar refrain. The stronger your shamatha, the stronger your Vipashyana will be. And in terms of the Vipashyana, the sharper it is, the clearer it is, then the deeper it can be. As you cut through, you pierce the veils of reification of yourself, your mind, your awareness as the subject in here. And when there's some glimmering of insight into the emptiness of subject, then it naturally follows that the object self must be empty as well. And if the subject is empty, empty of inherent nature, and the object is empty of inherent nature, then the reification of bifurcation of subject object, that evaporates. And so in that absence of the dualistic mind, as that evaporates as if into space, then what was already there may be unveiled, and that of course is Rigpa. And then you just rest there. It's called the Rigpa Choksha. You're just resting in Rigpa. So that was our best approximation of that for the time being. It's the ultimate yin, because you're really not doing anything at all. There's no striving, nothing to accomplish. So we return to the next. So, last verses that said, informed by scripture and reasoning, settled in single-minded equipoise in the state where things do not exist the way they appear. That is to say, where you ascertain the emptiness of things existing as they appear. Alternatively, Chantikirti Bada, that is the reverend of the revered Chantikirti, the Madhyamaka master, said, the ultimate reality of the mind, variously brings forth the worlds of sentient beings and the physical worlds. I'm just about positive. He says Senki Chuni. Do you have it right in front of you, Anna?
Yeah.
Senki Chuni?
Senyi.
Senyi, oh, that's good. Congratulations. Senki Chuni. Excellent, yeah. So Senyi, that is exactly my translation of Senyi. Senyi is Jitata. Okay? Jitata. The ultimate reality of the mind. It's a very interesting, very subtle, pithy statement. But the word I translated as brings forth is Gopa. And it's not Gyepa, as in generate, like, cause and effect, and you generate something. But Gopa has it bringing forth or displaying or setting out. Displaying. The worlds of sentient beings and the physical worlds. So the world of sentient beings of all kinds, the physical, the container, so to speak, the inanimate physical world, emerge forth. They're not being generated with cause and effect, not being generated by the ultimate reality of the mind. But they come forth. They're displayed, they manifest from this ultimate reality of the mind. Now in the context of Madhyamaka, this would simply be the emptiness of the mind, the shunya nature of the mind. Of course, if we look at the same statement from the perspective of Mahamudra Dzogchen, then that refers to Rigpa, pristine awareness. It's very subtle. It is not referring to causality. But if we ask, where are all these appearances emerging from? Well, on a relative level, you know this from the earlier, just straightforward Shamatha teachings, that all the appearances arising, that is to your own individual mind stream, are arising from your substrate. And you fall asleep, they all dissolve back into the substrate. It's pretty straightforward. But on the deepest level, all appearances generally, the worlds themselves, the worlds of sentient being, that is galaxies, planets, and so forth, all of these are brought forth, are displayed from the ultimate reality of the mind. So it's a much larger statement. Since it is taught that the mind is the root of all physical worlds and their sentient inhabitants. So again, it looks like we're definitely going into Chittamatra territory. The mind is primary, everything else is derivative, the root and the branches. Since it is taught, and we find this in the Parachapanavita and so forth, when you cut the root basis of the mind, and as you, I think you're familiar by now, this means cutting the reification of the mind. The grasping to the mind as being really in here, a real subject. Or in the Tibetan, Gyaltsen, a real object haver. Awareness has appearances, awareness has objects. So it's an object haver. That's how, and we translate that generally as subject. But when you cut the root basis of the mind, it is unlike cutting other deceptions. And that is, we can reify all kinds of things. We do. Elementary particles, galaxies, planets, and so forth. But he says this is different. If you cut through the reification of your own mind, something deeper is going on than cutting through the reification of other things. So you should act thus. When you analyze your own mind from within, the previous continuous equipoise, there it is again. It is not established as any kind of form. So that's kind of like a checklist. Okay, clear, got that one. No form whatsoever. It doesn't look like anything. No shape, color, etc. No physical attributes. So in the absence of it having any form, so it is a clear vacuity, like the sun when it is unobscured by clouds. It, that is your own mind, it gives rise to all kinds of thoughts and memories flowing outwards. If I were Panchen Baba, I would say, is it like that or not? Examine your mind. Remember that litany of his? Well, there's a really good one. If that's true, then you should see it's true. If it's not, then okay, tell how your experience differs from that. Unlike a lamp that has been doused, the mind is an uninterrupted stream of clarity and awareness. There they are, the two defining characteristics of consciousness. That does not cease. So this sounds extremely reminiscent of the brightly shining mind referred to by the Buddha, that is adventitiously on occasion veiled by contaminations or defilements, and then on occasion is not. But whether it's obscured or not, it's always there as an uninterrupted stream of clarity and awareness that does not cease, yet to the mind apprehending one's own mind, as you invert your awareness right in upon itself, mind looking at mind, the mind that you're looking at, it seems somehow independent, as if it's really in here, independent of anything out there, under its own power. So autonomous, which would certainly suggest inherent existence. So he's saying here, pretty obviously, that as all other appearances, people, places, and so forth, they appear as if from their own side, independent, under their own power, existing by their own inherent nature, so does the mind appear to itself. The conceived objects, all the objects conceived by the mind, the conceived objects that are grasped as being as they appear, so there's reification, and the mind that grasps objects as they appear, so the objects and the subject, the mind that grasps objects as they appear are, as stated by the protector Shantideva in the way of the Bodhisattva, so-called continua. That's the plural of continua. So-called continua and collections, like rosaries, armies, and so forth, are deceptive. So I jumped the gun a little bit yesterday, giving you the Panchen commentary to that verse, so you don't need to do it again. But the continua, or collection, so continua over time and collection over space. So a rosary, an army, these are collections over space. They occupy, they have less extensa, they are realities that occupy, that are extended in space. And the point is that a rosary is a single entity. Just really briefly here, a rosary, how many rosaries do you have? I have with me 2, that is here in Tuscany, 2. But each of them has 108 beads. So exactly how did 108 become 1? Not to mention the string and a little top notch. So that's a whole bunch of things. So why do you say you have 1 rosary? And in fact, you have 110 or 11 separate little units there. So how did 1 become many? Well, obviously by conceptual designation. How did a whole bunch of soldiers marching around, each of them having their own mind stream, their own bodies, how did they become an army? And so forth. And so these are deceptive. That is, the way they're apprehended, the way they appear, it's deceptive, misleading. And that's true not only for collection spread out in space, like rosary armies and so forth, or anything else, for example, composed of elementary particles, atoms, molecules, they're all the same. I mean, it's the same thing. We have the shmurge, which is 3 elements to it: a laptop, a cell phone, and a icon carrier. But the icon carrier, how many do I have in my hand? 1. How many atoms do I have in my hand? I can't even count that high. How do those atoms become one thing? Conceptual designation. So when we have strung together the individual beads of a rosary, the so-called rosary, is just an imputation. It's imputing one on many. And when we've collected individuals who bear arms, the so-called army is merely nominal, just an imputation. Of course, as usual, you don't find it it's not to be done in any one soldier, or even a whole bunch of soldiers. I mean, any military commander knows, if they just have a whole bunch of soldiers hanging out, that's not an army. It's just called a whole bunch of soldiers. That's not an army. And so apart from that, apart from being mere, I'm going to say, I have done what Anna suggested for a long time, and I'm going to do it now. I would prefer to say that the army is merely nominal, that's fine, and then merely imputed. That would be more accurate. Good translation. Imputed or designated, even this one. It's merely nominal, it's merely imputed. Apart from that, apart from their merely nominal status or imputed status, they do not really exist, they're not really there. Nowhere to be found. On the basis of scripture and reasoning that teach this, you should rest in single-pointed equipoise with the certainty that the mind does not exist the way it appears. So this was very, very concise, but he's just given instructions, pith instructions, on realizing the empty nature of your own mind, the unfindability of the mind, and that is reminiscent, of course, of Padmasambhava's teachings that I cited from Natural Liberation, engaging in the search for the mind, and then that not finding the mind, something that exists by its own characteristics. Thus the perfection of wisdom in 8,000 verses also says, it's a very, very famous statement. Mind does not exist as the mind, the nature of the mind is clear light. I think it's Semni Semachite, Semni Visawawo. I think that's it. I remember it a long time ago. The mind is not the mind. Semni Semachite, Semni Visawawo. Mind isn't the mind. That would probably have to be Sempiranjin Visawawo. The nature of the mind is clear light. So the mind is an entity. The mind is a subject, something in here. Unfindable. So the mind does not exist as some subjective entity in here. The nature of it is just sheer luminosity, sheer clear light. This states that no inherently established mind exists, and the nature of the mind is clear light. Emptiness. That indivisibility of luminosity and emptiness. Also the jewel heap, that's the Ratnavega Sutra, jewel heap sutra states, mind is not seen, was not seen, and will not be seen by any of the Buddhas of the 3 times. You know what that means? Seen as some entity, some object, something inherently existent. None of the Buddhas have seen it, or will ever see it. Then we return to the Kagyü tradition, Jay Marpa. Also, Jay Marpa states metaphorically that when he had ascertained the ultimate reality of the mind, as it is, he got it right. And as it is means dodo chepa. And dodapa means superposition, what you're superimposing, projecting, adding onto. You cut that. You peel it off. You just sever it. Anything you projected that wasn't there, cut that. Dodo katsa. And then dokur, that's it, dokur chepa. So you cut that which is imputed. And then kurva, anything that would deny what is there, you terminate that as well. So you release anything projected, and you cease denying anything that is there. That's cognitive intelligence. Not cognitive. It's not cognitive hyperactivity, where we're projecting things on reality and then conflating our projections with reality. and it's not cognitive deficit. This is my own terminology. And this is not cognitive deficit in the sense of not seeing what is there. Okay? That pretty much defines seeing reality as it is. So Marpa says here that when he ascertained the ultimate reality of the mind as it is, his mind in meditation was ablaze with emptiness. And as he says, I came to the banks of the Ganges River in the east through the kindness of Jayamaitripa. I realized the ground, unborn ultimate reality. This can only be this primordial non-duality of Dhammadhatu and primordial consciousness. My mind was ablaze with emptiness. I saw the primordial nature, reality free of conceptual elaborations. That's Dodo Chöpa, that is, cut away, cut through all the conceptual projections upon reality, cut through. I met the three mother Buddha bodies face to face. Buddha bodies, Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, face to face. From then on, this man's conceptual elaborations were severed. And then Dogen Pakmanrupa, one of another of the great, very early Kagyü masters, teaches, mind is the root. Mind is the root of both samsara and nirvana. Mind is pure suchness from the beginning. Suchness is a synonym for emptiness. Since from the beginning it is peaceful and unborn, mind is forever free from the extremes of conceptual elaborations. So here when he's referring to mind, obviously not samsaric mind, because samsaric mind is not the root of nirvana. Here when he says mind, he's referring to Chittata, the ultimate reality of mind. It is empty by nature, and it is luminous by nature. It is an indivisibility of emptiness and luminosity. And it's unborn, and transcendently, primordially peaceful, never disturbed, never agitated, and forever free. That dimension of awareness is forever free of the extremes of conceptual elaborations. It doesn't fall into them. In brief, it is not as if our spiritual friend is reputed to be omniscient, even though he isn't. And when he says our spiritual friend, he's referring to his root guru, Sangye. In reality, Sangye Yeshe knows everything, and I have passed on his oral instructions. So he said what he's done here. I don't see any ground for doubting what he just said. And that is, he's passing on an oral transmission here that quite possibly, until he wrote it down, hadn't been written down. And then he traces Sangye Yeshe received this from him, and he goes back on the Guru lineage. Very analogous to the 7-point mind training. I think we have every reason to believe that 7-point mind training originated from Atisha. But then for generations, I don't know now how many, but a number of generations, it was never written down. It was considered between Lamrim, the lamp for the path to enlightenment, and the 7-point mind training, that the Lamrim was for people of, dull faculties, where you take it step by step, and you're going renunciation, bodhicitta, shamatha, and then finally you get to, at the end of the book, then you get emptiness, right? It's safe, you won't fall into nihilism and so forth. But if you have received teachings on the 7-point mind training, it makes a very brief reference to the preliminary practices, fourth off the train of mind. And then there's a verse that's omitted. I don't know how it happened, but I saw a very early copy, like a 1,000-year-old copy, of the 7-point mind training, the root verses. And there's a verse that virtually all of the later versions leave out. And I, being the total shamatha fanatic, I leapt on it, like a dog finding a juicy bone. And he's just given Dampo Mundo Dala Lap. First of all, train in the preliminaries. That was it. And then the verse that's the line, it's a very short line, that's almost universally deleted now. I don't think they intentionally do it, just gets slipped through, was Dempa Tokne Samwa Den, having achieved stability, let the mystery be revealed, let the secret be revealed. And the secret, of course, is the nature of emptiness, especially the emptiness of your own mind. But then the Tokne, having achieved stability, gee, gosh, what's that going to mean? Or maybe Panchen, which enlightens us, as the later incarnation of Atisha. Of course, he's saying achieve meditative equipoise, that stability, that stillness. And then having done so, now let the mystery be revealed. and then he goes immediately into Vipashyana, right in the teachings of emptiness. So that was like, like a jet that takes off and just goes straight up, not like a big jet liner just slowly taking up. You just go, that's what he does in 7-point mind training. It's a very fast takeoff, right into ultimate reality. Right? What to do in the meditative state, right? When I'm actually on the cushion meditating, and what to do in post-meditative state. So this is for people of sharp faculties who will not fall into nihilism and goofy thoughts and misapprehension and so forth. And then laying this, bear in mind, left hand supporting right hand, right? And mudra of meditative at the point. Left hand is wisdom. The right hand skillful means. The right hand is renunciation and bodhicitta. The left hand is wisdom. So he's really teaching that approach. That the wisdom is supporting there, the wisdom, as you just initially step into the pool of bodhicitta, you're already cultivating that with some insight into emptiness of self, emptiness of others. So it's a different strategy. But then generations later, then Chökyi wrote down the verses of the 7-point mind training. So he's often cited as the author of it. Well, he was the scribe of it. He was the one that first put it down in writing. And Panchen, it seemed like he was the scribe who first wrote down these oral instructions that he received from Sangye Geshe. So it clearly does imply there was an oral lineage of Mahamudra in the Geluk-Kagyü tradition, Sangye Geshe being the Geluk, because he just said so. So why would he lie? I mean, it would be very nice that I did all of this by myself. You can give me a big handshake because I'm so clever. But he said no. I received this from Sangye Geshe. In brief, as related by my spiritual friend Sangye Geshe, who truly knows everything. This is the root text. When you're fully aware that whatever appears is conceptually apprehended, then the ultimate absolute space of phenomena, that's my translation of Dhammadhatu, then the ultimate absolute space of phenomena appears without reliance on anything else. Mine is a more literal translation. For awareness to enter the nature of this appearance, single-pointedly rest in meditative equipoise in that. How wonderful. M-O, why not make it English? How wonderful, marvelous, fantastic. So there's the root text. Let's just let Panchen, which I won't interrupt. Panchen, which is going to give a commentary on his own text. So whatever appears is conceptually apprehended. So we like to think, and to some extent we're justified in thinking, that when I'm just resting in awareness, or in the modern Vipassana tradition, just rest and bear attention, non-reactively. And to some extent, of course, you can, and that can be very beneficial. That's why so many people find Vipassana or something like mindfulness meditation helpful. That's because it is helpful. But if one thinks that just by an act of will, you can simply rest and just kind of turn off conceptuality altogether, well, this means you haven't, you're still a beginner. You really don't understand the mind. Because whatever appears is conceptually apprehended by the samsaric mind, by the non-arya. Whatever you're tending to, whether you're in deep sleep, whether you're dreaming, having a lucid dream, whether you're in the waking state, whether you're resting in shamatha, whether you're resting in the substrate consciousness, or whether you're engaging in Vipassana practice, whatever appears, the conceptual mind comes in and takes hold. It's like a conquistador. It comes in and takes possession. I own that. It's not voluntary. If it were voluntary, we just stop. Stop it. But it doesn't work that way. Even when you've achieved shamatha, it's still imbued with a subtle flow, a murmuring of subtle conceptuality. A subtle bifurcation of subject-object, a subtle grasping to I like, bliss, luminosity, non-conceptuality. The mental afflictions don't arise. Mental afflictions do not arise. They're like fleas that carry the bubonic plague. Let's say the bubonic plague is like mental afflictions. Well, the bubonic plague couldn't spread without the fleas. They didn't get the bubonic plague. But if you don't have fleas, then they don't get it. And then, of course, their host was rats. Mental afflictions, like the bubonic plague, except they're much more destructive. They kill far more people than bubonic plague did. Mental afflictions. They can't get around, they can't operate without being hosted by, without being parasitic on, conceptual mind. Mental delusions don't take root in a purely non-conceptual mind. That doesn't mean the conceptual mind is bad. It can be, we're generating bodhicitta with conceptual mind. People come up with masterpieces of art and music, architecture, and so forth with conceptual mind. Not bad, any more than fleas are bad. They're just fleas, they're just insects. But there is the point, whatever appears as conceptually apprehended. And some years ago, I listened to a very eminent cognitive psychologist. His name is Ann Treisman at Princeton University. And I can't say this with total certainty, but almost certainty. When the question came up, in Buddhism we speak of perceptual modes of awareness and then conceptual modes of awareness. And the perceptual or non-conceptual, pratyaksha, is not conceptual. And then we have the conceptual. And so we have these two modes. It's very widely acknowledged and studied in Buddhist psychology. And she was asked about this, and she said, well, from our perspective, all your modes of apprehension, everything you're aware of, they're all saturated by conceptualization. And therefore, she said, whatever you're experiencing, therefore, it's not quite this simple, but everything you're experiencing is illusory. That's what she said. Everything you're experiencing, like an optical illusion. You're not seeing reality as it is. And everything you're seeing is filtered, configured by concepts. Well, that's what he just said 400 years ago. That even when you're resting in something that relatively feels like it's experienced as non-conceptual, there's a subtle strain of conceptuality. And of course, sometimes we're completely overwhelmed by the concepts. We get totally involved, enmeshed, like a fly in a spider's web, totally enmeshed in our concepts. And then we can go start fantasizing into the projections of just getting caught up in our imagination, the cognitive hyperactivity disorder. So he says, whatever appears is conceptually apprehended. The appearances are not conceptual, but our apprehension of them is filtered by concepts. And bear in mind, concept doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to have language. There are concepts that articulate themselves in language, but there are subtle levels of it's called mentation, actually, manas. There are subtle levels of mentation or activity of the mind that are non-conceptual on the coarse level. But we still distinguish, that is, it's not coarse conceptualization. So moving on, he's just saying this conceptualization permeates all of our experience, as long as you're ordinary being non-arya. When you are aware that whatever appears is merely imputed by thought, and you see that, the ultimate absolute space of phenomena appears as a mental object, without depending on other conditions. And you enter it. Your mind, your awareness of it merges, as they say, when you're meditating on emptiness, it's like pouring a glass of water into another glass of water. And it merges. There's a non-duality of the luminosity of your awareness and the emptiness of Dhammadhatu. As Chandakirti states, conventional truth is a method. Ultimate truth emerges from that method. It's a much closer translation of what it doesn't say. So when you're engaging in investigation, examining how do phenomena appear, how do you apprehend them, do you reify them, how do they exist in their own side or merely as something imputed, that whole method, that mode of inquiry, which is conventional, is relative, that's the method, and as a result of devoting yourself to that method, then ultimate truth, shunyata, emerges, it manifests, it becomes clear. Awareness enters into this appearance, the appearance of Dhammadhatu, and upon single pointedly uniting, ultimately, I really change this around a lot, I think this is closer. Awareness enters into this appearance, okay, like one glass of water poured into another. And upon single pointedly uniting ultimate reality, as Dhammadhatu, the object of the mind, that's what you're attending to, with subjective consciousness, there is meditative equipoise. Meditative equipoise is in that evenness, that balance of uniting, bringing together and indivisibly merging ultimate reality, Dhammadhatu, with the mind that realizes it. How wonderful! So that's his commentary to the preceding verse. In accordance with the meaning of the final two lines, for awareness to enter the nature of appearance, of disappearance, single-pointedly rest in meditative equipoise, and that are wonderful. For that, in accordance with that, so Dambasangye says, whirl the spear of awareness within emptiness. The view of Ding Lipas is unobstructed. This and other sayings make the same point. And I'm just about positive that's not in the root text. Really doesn't look like it. And so I just have that as a separate line in smaller letters. This and other sayings make the same point. They converge on the same, making the same point. The virtues of equipoise on Mahamudra. The virtues of resting in meditative equipoise in Mahamudra should be dedicated to unexcelled awakening. So now we're coming to the close here. It'll take him a while. You see, we still have 12 pages. But we're coming now to dedication of merit. I mean, he just covered the practice, including culminating in the realization of the emptiness of your own mind and its non-duality with Dhammadhatu. So the virtues of equipoise on Mahamudra should be dedicated to unexcelled awakening. In the root text, the passage from among the three divisions, preparation, the actual session, and post-meditation, that's going back, of course, to stanza 9, the root text teaches this directly. So there are three aspects to the practice and to the text. Preparation, actual session, and then post-meditation. So now we're here in the post-meditative stage. So when to apply the way of following up is implicit but unclear. In fact, it is to be applied at this juncture. In order to delineate boundaries from here on out, I set forth what is in the root text. So we finished the main practice, and now we're in the concluding phase of dedicating merit, which is as important, of course, as the initial motivation. Afterward, after you've been resting in meditative equipoise, non-dually experiencing, or non-dually experiencing or uniting your experience of Dhammadhatu and your own awareness. Afterward, the positive karma that has arisen from meditating on Mahamudra, together with the sea of virtues collected in the three times, should be dedicated to the great unexcelled awakening. Dedicating that. It is fitting that this be applied. So now here is a synthesis of how to continue practicing in the post-meditative state after you have arisen from the equipoise of resting in Mahamudra. How to unmistakably ascertain the generic idea of the object of negation when you return to meditative equipoise, and how to dispel other qualms regarding both meditative equipoise and the post-meditative state. So I changed the language. Because dedicated merit, well, that was when you come to the conclusion of your meditative equipoise, sitting on the cushion doing the formal practice, dedicate the merit. But now, of course, maintain the continuity of your practice in between sessions. And so that's what he's describing here. Here's a synthesis of how to practice in the post-meditative state when you've arisen from equipoise and Mahamudra. Maintaining the flow of awareness, how to unmistakably ascertain the generic idea of the object of negation when you return to meditative equipoise. How do you come back in again? And how to dispel other qualms regarding meditative equipoise and the post-meditative state. So you're not conflating the two, you have to be very clear on that. So the root text teaches thus. Once you familiarize yourself in that way, whatever appears as objects of the 6 types of consciousness, precisely realize how they appear. Now there's that very familiar strategy, right? How they appear. And their way of existence will nakedly and vividly arise. Identifying whatever arises is the crucial point of view. It makes it very simple. The Vipashyana can be extremely complex, bringing in a whole host of types of logical analyses. But he gives it simple as it's very much in the spirit of Mahamudra. So see how they appear, and see how they exist. That will nakedly arise. You'll see their purely imputation or imputed way of existence. See what's designated upon appearances. And you'll see that they don't exist without that designation. And therefore they have to be empty. That is, they're not there from the inside. They're not there in the very nature of appearances themselves. And identifying whatever arises, appearances, objects, and I could say the manner in which they arise, which is to say the manner in which they're apprehended, is the crucial point of view. In short, whatever appears, whether your own mind or something else, do not reify it. Okay? Now this is now during the post-meditative state. And you can do that. You can follow his instruction that if and only if you recognize when you're reifying and you recognize when you're not reifying. And you know that you're not doing it homogenously. And that key point this morning, really practical, very short. But when you see that your mind is now in the thralls of, in the grip of mental affliction, I would suggest you just assume, as a working hypothesis, reification must be active. What am I reifying? And then observe how you're reifying whatever has triggered the mental affliction and bending you out of shape. So when you see that you do it and then you don't do it, just like the brightly shining mind is obscured and then not obscured. It's not equally obscured. It's not always under the clouds. It's clear and then it's not clear. We reify and then we don't reify. So then you really need to identify. This is the Panchen in practice during the post-meditative state. Recognize when you do reify and then stop doing it. And that is, when you recognize that you are reifying, when you recognize that, then you can recognize that that which you reify does not exist from its own side. That's a delusional way of apprehending it. And when you see that you're deluded, when you non-deludedly recognize that you're deluded, then you can stop being deluded. You can stop acting in a deluded way, and you can actually stop reifying. It is an act of will. But if and only you recognize it when it occurs and recognize you don't need to do it, then you have a choice. Ascertain its meaning, its manner of existence. And that's the first line in Atisha 7-point mind training after doing Shamatha is Chöna Milantaburta, view phenomena as if they were dreams, appearing to exist from one side and then not. They don't exist in that fashion. Therefore, don't reify them. Don't reify them as if they did. So ascertain its manner of existence and sustain that continually. Okay, that's a tall order, but that's what he's suggesting, that's what you should do. Now, of course, if you achieve shamatha, that becomes quite practical. If you don't, well, you have a lot of mind wandering and so forth. It will break it up a lot. But that's what he's suggesting here. This is you arise from the space-like meditative equipoise, and in the post-meditative state, you attend to the dream-like, or the illusion-like nature of appearances. They appear in a manner in which they don't exist. Sustain that continually. Well, you can't do that, of course, if you've not developed the high degree of shamatha. You can't do anything continually. Knowing this, the natures of all the phenomena of samsara and nirvana are united as one. So then you see that the natures of all phenomena, of every kind whatsoever, are all united as one in the sense they're all equally heavy by nature. Your guru, your dharma, Buddha, pure lens everything. So there's the root text and then the commentary. Thus, after familiarizing yourself with meditative equipoise like that, in post-meditation, you should, through detailed and discriminating examination, I would probably say discerning. Discriminating sounds kind of nasty. It's not wrong, but I just prefer through precise and discerning examination, well realize the way anything, such as form and so forth, that appears as an object of the 6 types of consciousness, appears, such as to the eye and so forth. So recognize how they appear. Back to that theme. Recognize the mode of appearance. Recognize the incongruity, incompatibility between how things appear, how they exist. By analyzing in that way, and bear in mind you're using both of the, well, 2 out of 5 of the jhana factors here, like very sharp knives. If you achieve Shamatha, you have all the 5 jhana factors right at your fingertips. And this is coarse investigation and precise analysis. And you're using that. And it's not just sitting there being blissful. By analyzing in that way, although they appear to be true existent, appearing like something unreal and hollow, like a dream, a mirage, or reflection of the moon and water, their manner of existence as dependently related events, bearing no independent essence, appears nakedly and vividly. I'll read that again, because I changed a lot. By analyzing in that way, although they appear to be truly existent, appearing like something unreal and hollow, like a dream, a mirage, or reflection of the moon and water, their manner of existence as dependently related events, how do they exist? Well, they exist as dependent related events, or some people say dependent arisings, bearing no independent existence. That manner in which they exist appears naked and vividly. So now you're really there at form is emptiness, emptiness is form. You see, then it's non-dual. On that basis, your ascertainment of ultimate reality grows greater. For as J. Maitri Yogi says, identification of whatever appears is the crucial point of the view. So it's very, very empirical. Not really a head trip at all. Theory just enough. But I think it's crucial here. But he said way back when, weeks ago, is that there are 2 approaches, 2 legitimate approaches. And one is, first you really immerse yourself through hearing, thinking, and meditation on the view, especially hearing and thinking, and that can take years of hearing and thinking and debating and memorizing and analyzing, investigating great treatises on Madhyamaka. And maybe get your PhD or your Acharya or Kempo Geshe degree. And then you go off and you cultivate the meditative state, Shamatha. So there's one way. In which case you can have a lot of groundwork to be done. There's a lot of theory to really immerse oneself and sharpen your fast, sharp, clear, and profound intelligence. You're just sharpening your knife all the way through that. And then, coming very well prepared in terms of theory, then you immerse yourself in meditative equipoise, and you exceed before that. If you were taking that approach, this would probably be a 500-page text. Because he spent a lot of time laying out the subtleties of the Madhyamaka view. But this text presents pith instructions, and of course it's highlighting the alternative route of practicing and achieving shamatha first, which of course seems to be, according to Tzong, it was very rare back then. According to Jujulingpa, Padmasambhava, it's very rare in the 19th century. And that was before the genocide and the catastrophe in Tibet. So it seems pretty recently pushed back, because there are relatively few people who are following this route nowadays. And my very passionate conviction is there should be more. So knowing thus how to practice. So once you've arisen from that, there we go. So there we go. It's like. Now, what more? Okay, wait at the top. Now, what more is there? What need is there of more? Are we finished yet? And he says, well, let me summarize briefly. For those of us commoners, the term is tsurtong, and it's those who are looking this way, on the near side. So what was over here is samsara, and what's over there is nirvana. It's kind of cute. But the Aryas see over there. They're seeing the reality that is veiled by relative truth. And so that's the transcendent. Whereas those of us who have not ascertained the transcendent, then we're stuck in here, in relative truth, in samsara. And so I chose his translation, commoners. Actually, I think he said, what is he? He doesn't say commoners. What did he say here?
Those of us who see only this side of things.
This side of things, yeah. Well, it's literally true, but you wouldn't have a clue what he's talking about. But Surtong is referring to those who have not yet seen ultimate reality. So, but on another occasion in this translation, he refers to them as commoners. It refers to us as commoners. just waddling around in samsara. For those of us commoners, it is precisely the way this or that subject, one's own mind and so forth, appears, that is the mode of appearance of an object of negation. So for us ordinary folks, put it that way, it's just the way things appear that is to be refuted. And whether it's our minds, object appearances, and so forth, they all appear as if from their own side, by their own inherent nature, really there. And that's precisely what is to be negated through incisive, piercing, and penetrative insight. So thus, without fixating on or reifying that appearing object, and fixating on, that's my translation here of Zhenpa, which can be manifesting Zhenpa. Fixating, I think, is pretty good. Fixating, well, this is exactly what happens whenever we experience the mental afflictions of craving or of hostility. We fixate, we get fixated. Paul Ekman calls that slipping into a refractory period. Some of you might remember that. Very cool term. Straight psychology. But where we just slip into a mode where we just can't see out of that particular mode if we develop some real contempt for another person. Then all we can see of that person is that person's contemptible qualities. And if the person has any other qualities, they're just invisible, we just can't see them. Other people who don't loathe or have contempt for the person might see them perfectly well and just say, what's wrong with you? You have this kind of monocular vision, like you can only see this aspect of this person. What's wrong with you? And the answer is, well, you're in a refractory period. And likewise, when we become infatuated with someone, whether it's a political figure, romantic, or whatever, and not only a person, but a thing, a car, what have you, whenever there's an infatuation, all we can see is the positive. We accentuate it, we fixate, and of course, very often think, I've got to have it, got to have it. And so that's the fixation. Generally falls into those two camps of craving or hostility. So without fixating on or reifying, well, that's where the delusion comes in. So the fixating would be kind of indicative, I think, of the craving and hostility, and the reifying is pointing right to delusion. So without fixating on or reifying that appearing object, you must ascertain that his way of existing is simply its lack of existing as it appears. That's very simply stated. That's emptiness. It doesn't exist as it appears. So this is where the practice of bare attention shows its severe limitations. And that is if one is quite, well, let's just be gentle here, in an uninformed way, equating Vipassana with mindfulness, false. Equating mindfulness with bare attention, wildly false. And then just resting in kind of open awareness or bare attention or choiceless awareness and thinking I'm practicing Vipassana. Well, you just false, and a whole stack of falsehood. But if you think that's sufficient, well, again, you may be exception like Bahia, who can say, but if you're not like Bahia, you're resting there, simply attending to appearances at face value. Right? You're just seeing appearances. And the appearances lie. It's not just what you're piling onto them. Even without conceptually reifying them, they already appear as if they're appearing from their own side. And they will continue to do so until you're in 8th stage Arya Bodhisattva. That's when you begin to start removing that veil, that cognitive obscuration of the appearance of things as if from their own side. That's way so far down the path. I can't even imagine that far. Even in our hut, according to Madhyamaka, even in our hut, the person is not totally free, still sees things as if they exist from their own side. That's how they appear to him or her. Doesn't grasp onto them as such. But still, appearances lie. Right? And it's only when you're on the 8th bhumi, you're kind of coming around the finish line, that only then do you begin, through your practice, to erode, to evaporate, to dispel that cognitive obscuration of appearances manifesting as if from your own side. So that's so far up the road. And so for ordinary people like us, like ourselves, commoners, ordinary folk, that's maybe a nice word for it, whatever we're attending to appears in a way that it doesn't exist. And if you are without using any kind of critical acumen, any kind of discernment, investigation, analysis, none of that, because it's exhausting. And you just say, no, I'm just going to practice Vipassana. So many people think this. The propaganda has been extremely effective. the Vipassana is just being here now, just now I'm practicing Vipassana, just being aware of whatever's coming up. Well, you're aware of delusional appearances, and you're just resting there, delusional appearances of your own mind, of your own identity, and of a phenomena, and you're just resting there. Oh. If I'm not a marmot yet, I'm definitely on that track. It's the crudest facsimile of resting in Vipa, because you haven't even started. You're being like a little kid, like a 5-year-old watching Nova, where Green, what's his first name? Green, physicist, Brian Green. Imagine a little, like 5-year-old, watching Brian Green explain string theory. Do I get my doctorate now? Totally clueless. So, but people like to think that they're very advanced. They like to think they're practicing the highest. So they get a weekend introduction to Dzogchen and then they do Dzogchen practitioner. Maybe they are. Probably not. So, thus without fixating on or reifying that appearing object, which we do all the time. And we have to cut that. That's an old habit. We have to sever that habit. It does not come easily. That's where ethics, samadhi, and wisdom come in. Or without fixating on or reifying that appearing object, you must ascertain that its way of existing is simply its lack of existing as it appears. And you're not going to get that by just staring at it and maintaining moment not general awareness. You're not even close. You haven't even started it. Such meditative equipoise is like space, open, expansive, with no object. So you're resting in space like meditative equipoise. Once you've arisen from that, I'm going to change this translation a lot. Once you have arisen from that, when you observe whatever remains in the absence of true existence, so you're seeking to sustain your awareness of the entrance of phenomena as you get off your cushion, walk about, have a cup of tea or whatever. When you observe whatever remains in the absence of true existence, you should always maintain your realization by applying the yogas of post-meditation, in which things appear unmistakably as dependent related events that are merely nominal, brought about by mere imputation. So even though to your awareness they're appearing as if they're inherently existent, with the eye of wisdom, you must see them as empty. You maintain your realization by applying the yogas of post-meditation, not just being aware of the appearances. And by applying the yoga of post-meditative state, sustaining the flow of insight, then you see things unmistakably as dependently related events, not inherently existent. And those dependently related events, in those 3 ways explained earlier, you see the way of existing phenomena is merely nominal, and they depend for their very existence upon imputation. Knowing thus how to practice during meditative equipoise and in the post-meditative state, rest in equipoise by indivisibly unifying the ultimate nature of all phenomena, samsara and nirvana, as the mere absence of true existence. So that equality of seeing all phenomena of samsara and nirvana as being equal in the sense of being just realizing emptiness as the mere absence of true existence. Seeing this as the ultimate mode of existence, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. During the post-meditative state, you must familiarize yourself with uniting the relative natures of phenomena as being mere appearances like illusions. So when you're in the meditative state, you're just resting in that space-like awareness, realizing the emptiness of all phenomena. So emphasis on the kind of the ontological emphasis of how do they exist, they're empty of inherent nature. Then you emerge from meditation into the post-meditative state, and now phenomenologically, as you must engage with and be aware of, the myriad appearances arising, the many objects that populate the world around you, then you must see them as being mere appearances. Mere appearances being empty of inherent nature, like illusions, that appear to be there and have causal efficacy, but they are not really there. Also, as stated by Aryadeva, the viewer of one entity is explained as the viewer of all. The emptiness of one is the emptiness of all. So it's that thing. If you realize the emptiness of one, you realize the emptiness of all. And that's where we will pause. Covered a bit of territory today. Still have another 10 pages to go. Okay, so there are your marching orders. The army of Vipashyana practitioners. But also, now that we're well into Vipassana territory, which is way up there in the top of the pyramid, clarity, vividness, acuity, I know very well that it can be a bit stressful, a bit tight, a bit exhausting. Don't overdo it. If you're the chief shamatha, then I would say just go for it. You're not going to get stressed out. The base of the pyramid is so strong, you just keep on cutting through. Make quick work of it. Engaging Wadagi said, if you achieve shamatha, the Panchen is easy. If you haven't, or the less you have, the harder it is for the Panchen. So, in the theme of just being kind to yourself and allowing yourself to still enjoy the practice, and you can't do that, I think, if you're just hitting a wall of frustration and feeling you're just not up to it, it's not going well, then keep on coming back to, you can always throttle back, and just come back to any mode of the shamatha that you like. Just keep on cultivating more and more deeply the sense of ease, the inner calm, composure. But also you can leave a head once in a while. And that's what we did on the last session. Because that was our best approximation of just resting in Rigpa. Okay. And it's not foolish. I think it's not misguided. And I do not think that wonderful teachers like Chökyi and Tzong and many others, giving weekend or week-long and so forth, introductions to the Dzogchen, I do not think that they're misleading people. I've heard them speak, I've never heard them say anything that I thought, oh no. I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful. To inspire people, to give them a taste. And so this gives a little taste of, all right, let's just do our best approximation. It's like when you're resting in awareness of awareness as a method. You're doing your best approximation of simply resting in the substrate consciousness, right? Taking the fruition as the path. Not that it's a kind of poor approximation, but for the time being, this is what I should do. So be happy with that. And likewise, from now on, when the Spirit moves you, when you feel like it, then do a little bit of investigation, like seeing, the searching for the mind, and not finding it, not finding that which is observing, that entity in there, the real subject, and in that not finding, then the claustrophobia of reifying ourselves and our own minds, the kind of alienation, frankly. There is an alienation in that. If I truly exist over here, by my own inherent nature, then I am alienated from everything else, which is radically other. Right? And so this is freeing, it's liberating, very relaxing, just to cut through that and say, oh, what a relief. What a relief, that which was always so claustrophobic and tight and bound up, knotted up. Oh, it doesn't even exist. What a relief. And then resting there, just then rest and not me. No expectation, no striving, no anticipation. Just rest there. And that's where profound intelligence arises. You get there by means of the fast, the sharp, and the clear. Where you wind up is profound wisdom. And that's where the profundity arises, in that, finally, that not doing. But that assumes you've done the hard work, the shamatha, the Vipassana investigation. And it's so tempting, I totally understand. There's nothing difficult about this. Why people would just like to skip all the difficulties of shamatha, all the dredging of the psyche and all that, and fretting, oh, I'm not progressing very fast. And say, oh, that's all so not what I want to do. And Vipassana, oh, what a headache. Can I skip that too? Just be the power of now. Just be, oh, that's what I used to do when I was 20. I like that. And even without the marijuana, it's still the natural high. Okay, dude. And